Hello and welcome to Poetry with a Penguin here at the North Battleford Public Library. I'm your host Michael Putman, and together with my co-host Kirby the Penguin here, we wish you the best health in these trying times. Now, since April is National Poetry Month, Kirby and I thought we would recite some verses and discuss the enduring value of poetic work and oral traditions of poetry in particular, starting both from ancient Greece at the dawn of European literature and from First Nations poetry here on Turtle Island. Before we get to the recitations, however, let us take a moment to consider what we actually mean by these poetic oral traditions. I'm the last person on earth who will discourage you to read print books, obviously. But even though we have a very strong print or book culture now, let us recall that until quite modern times, a great deal of literature, stories, and scriptural tradition even, was transmitted orally, also in Western European culture. And it still is in other cultures around the world. So that even where you do have printed texts serving as props or backstops, as it were, they still rely heavily on oral recitation, or traditional transmission of culture. So you would pick the words or verses up by ear in these cultures. You would learn them by heart. And even when you read from a printed book in the old days, you would sometimes recite aloud as you did so. Nowadays, it's somewhat unusual to do that. It's somewhat unusual. Now, I'm betting that if you're like me, you maybe can't recite long passages from literature that you learned in school, maybe, or the Bible, or Shakespeare, or things that are some of our ancestors, did pretty easily back in the day. Nevertheless, if you're like me, you've got stuck in your memory, by heart, a very great number of pop music lyrics, bits of dialogue from your favorite movies, or even, or especially, quite a number of advertising rhymes, jingles that you heard on the radio or television growing up, still stuck in your subconscious after all these years. And I'm betting you could call this our modern oral culture then, in a way. And this sort of culture is mostly, of course, a fun diversion or entertainment, and of course the advertisements there to get you to go shopping. That's about the extent of it. But as for ancient oral culture, well, it was, of course, entertaining at a time when people had no internet or television or radio. It often had a very serious purpose, that of teaching ethics, customs, morality, transmitting traditional worldview and history, from your ancestors down to your parents, then to you, and so on down the line. Or even, as with the ancient Greek poet philosophers Parmenides and Empedocles and the like, it was a means of doing philosophy and even giving birth to what would ultimately evolve into what we know as science and logic. So it's a very serious thing indeed, not just for entertainment. Now, the oral poetic traditions could do this because it would be passed from mouth to ear and thence to the heart or memory. The person receiving the tradition would be transformed by it, inspired by it, rather than merely distracted by it for a moment or two of entertainment before forgetting much of it. As is admittedly often the case when we read, texts, particularly novels. At the end of it, you remember key details about the plot, but you don't really remember streams of prose from it, unless you have exceptionally good memory. If you do, more power to you. Now, this, by the way, was noted even as far back as the philosopher Plato, who wrote one of his dialogues. He made a half joke that we invented writing as a sort of aid to forgetfulness. So if you don't have to remember something, in other words, you joke that you wrote it down. So now, speaking of the Greeks, let us give a recitation for one of my all-time favorite poems, Homer's Odyssey. This great classic, of course, will be familiar to a great many of you. But just to give a brief recap or summary, it's an epic poem that follows the wanderings and adventures of the Greek warrior Odysseus, a veteran of the Trojan War, as he tries to reach his home and his family in Ithaca, where a bunch of would-be suitors of his alleged widow, of course she's not actually widowed, but they don't know that. She's not entirely sure, but she suspects he's still alive. She's right. Anyways, these suitors were abusing the sort of sacred ancient Greek rules of hospitality and eating his family, out of house and home, as we would say, presuming him to be in fact dead, and waiting for her, his alleged widow, to pick one of them, to become married to. And we will read Robert Fagel's English translation at Kirby's recommendation. Since he feels an A translation is published by Penguin Classics, can't be all that bad. Huh? So we begin at Book 17, line 369, where our hero Odysseus returns from his many misadventures and troubles to his home on Ithaca in the disguise of a beggar, thus posing as a sort of guest or beggar in his own home in order to size up the gang of suitors who have overstayed their welcome. So, right behind Telemachus came Odysseus into his own house, looking for all the world like an old and broken beggar hunched on a stick, his body wrapped in shameful rags. Just in the doorway, just at the ashwood threshold where he settled down, leaning against the cypress post a master joiner planed smooth and hung with a plumb line years ago. Telemachus motioned the swineherd over now, and choosing a whole loaf from a fine wicker tray, and as much meat as his outstretched hands could hold, he said, "Now take these to the stranger. Tell him, too, to go make the rounds of the suitors, beg from one and all. Bashfulness for a man in need is no great friend." And Eumaeus did his bidding, went straight up to the guest and winged a greeting. "Here, stranger, Prince Telemachus sent you these, and tells you, too, to go make the rounds of the suitors, beg from one and all. Bashfulness for a beggar, he says, is no great friend." "Powerful Zeus, the crafty king," responded, king being Odysseus, "grant that your prince be blessed among mankind, and his heart's desires come to pass." Taking the food in both hands, setting it down, spread out on his filthy sack before his feet, the beggar fell to his meal, as the singer raised a song throughout the house. Once he'd supped and the stirring bard had closed, the suitors broke into uproar down along the hall. And now Athena came to the side of Laertes' royal son and urged him, "Go now, gather crusts from all the suitors, test them, so we can tell the innocent from the guilty." But not even so would Athena save one man from death. Still, off he went, begging from each in turn, circling left to the right, reaching out his hand, like a beggar from the day that he was born. They pitied him, gave him scraps, were puzzled too, asking each other, "Who is this? Where is he from?" Till the goatherd Melanthius shouted out in their midst, "Listen to me, you lords who court our noble queen. I'll tell you about the stranger. I've seen him before. I know for a fact the swineherd let him in, though I have no idea who the fellow is or where he thinks he comes from." At that, Antinous wheeled on Eumaeus, lashing out at him. "Your Highness, swineherd, why drag this to town? Haven't we got our share of vagabonds to deal with? Disgusting beggars who lick the feasters' plates? Isn't it quite enough, these swarming crowds consuming your master's bounty? Must you invite this rascal in the bargain?" Antinous, highborn as you are, you told the man, Eumaeus, that was a mean, low speech. Now who'd go out, who on his own hook, not I, and ask a stranger in from nowhere, unless he had some skills to serve the house? A prophet, a healer who cures disease, a worker in wood, or even a God-inspired bard whose singing warms the heart. They're the ones asked in around the world. A beggar? Who'd invite a beggar to bleed his household white? You of all the suitors are always roughest on the servants of your king, on me most of all. Not that I care, no, so long as his queen, his wise queen, is still alive in the palace. Prince Telemachus, too. "Stop, Eumaeus," poised Telemachus broke in quickly now. "Don't waste so much breath. Antinous here. It's just his habit to bait a man with abuse and spur the rest as well." He wheeled on the suitor, letting loose. "How kind you are to me, Antinous, kind as a father to his son, encouraging me to send the stranger packing from my house with a harsh command. Well, I'd never do it, God forbid. Take and give to the beggar. I don't grudge it. I'd even urge you on. No scruples now. Never fear your gifts will upset my mother or any servant in King Odysseus' royal house. But no such qualm could enter that head of yours, bent on feeding your own face, not feeding strangers." Antinous countered the young prince in kind. So high and mighty Telemachus, such unbridled rage. If all the suitors gave him the sort of gift I'll give, the house would be rid of him for 3 whole months. With that, from under his table he seized the stool that propped his smooth feet as he reveled on, just lifting it into view. But as for the rest, all gave to the beggar, filled his sack with handouts, bread and meat, and Odysseus seemed at the point of getting back to his door-sill, done with testing suitors, home free himself, when he stopped beside Antinous, begging face to face. Give me a morsel, friend. You're hardly the worst Achaean here, it seems, the noblest one, in fact. You look like a king to me. So you should give a bigger crust than the rest, and I will sing your praises all across the earth. I too once lived in a lofty house that men admired, rolling in wealth. I'd often give to a vagabond like myself, whoever he was. Whatever need had brought him to my door. And crowds of servants I had, and lots of all it takes to live the life of ease to make men call you rich. But Zeus ruined it all, God's will, no doubt, when he shipped me off with a roving band of pirates bound for Egypt, a long hard sail to wreck my life. There in the Nile Delta I moored our ships of war. God knows I ordered my trusty crews to stand by, just where they were, and guard the anchored fleet, and I sent a patrol to scout things out from higher ground. But swept away by their own reckless fury, the crew went berserk. They promptly began to plunder the lush Egyptian farms, dragged off the women and children, killed the men. Outcries reached the city in no time. Stirred by shouts, the entire town came streaming down at the break of day, filling the river plain with chariots, ranks of infantry, and the gleam of bronze. Zeus, who loves the lightning, flung down murderous panic on all my men-at-arms. No one dared to stand his ground and fight. Disaster ringed us round from every quarter. Droves of my men they hacked down with swords, let off the rest alive to labor for them as slaves. Myself, they passed me on to a stranger come their way to ship me to Cyprus. Iasus' son Demeter it was, who ruled Cyprus then with an iron fist. And from there I sailed to Ithaca, just as you see me now, ground down by pain and sorrow. Oh, good God Almighty, Antinous cut him short. What spirit brought this pest to plague our feast? Back off. Into the open. Clear my table. Or you'll soon land in Egypt, Cyprus, to break your heart. What a brazen, shameless beggar. Scrounging food from each man in turn. And look at their handouts. Reckless, never a qualm, no holding back. Not when making free with the next man's goods. Each one's got plenty here. Pity, pity, the wry Odysseus countered, drawing away. No sense in your head to match your handsome looks. You'd grudge your servant a pinch of salt from your own larder, you who lounge at the next man's board but lack the heart to tear a crust of bread and hand it on to me, though there's God's plenty here. Boiling over, Antinous gave him a scathing look and let fly. Now you won't get out of this hall unscarred, I swear. Not after such a filthy string of insults. With that he seized the stool and hurled it. Square in the back it struck Odysseus, just under the right shoulder. But he stood up against it, steady as a rock, unstaggered by the blow. Just shook his head, silent, his mind churning with thoughts of bloody work. Back he went to the door-sill, crouched, and setting down his sack about to burst, he faced the suitors, saying, Hear me out, you lords who court the noble queen. I must say what the heart inside me urges. There's nothing to groan about, no hurt when a man takes a blow as he fights to save his own possessions, cattle or shining flocks. But Antinous struck me, all because of my good-for-nothing belly. That curse that makes such pain for us poor men. But if beggars have their gods and furies too, let Antinous meet his death before he meets his bride. Enough, stranger, Antinous volleyed back. Sit there and eat in peace, or go get lost. Or else, for the way you talk, these young men will hale you up and down the halls by your hands or feet until you're skinned alive. Naked threats, but the rest are outraged, even those brash suitors. One would say to another, Look, Antinous, that was a crime to strike the luckless beggar. Another, your fate is sealed if he's some god from the blue. Another, and the gods do take on the look of strangers dropping in from abroad, disguised in every way as they roam and haunt our cities, watching over us. Another, all our foul play, all our fair play too. So they warned, but Antinous paid no heed. That is the end of the recitation from Odyssey. The Odyssey may be said to have two overarching themes, by the way. One is the military veteran's journey home, and homesickness for ancestral lands whenever one is not being distracted by various pleasures or immediate problems, as Odysseus and his men often are in the poem. One would think the journey home after a war, would be a simple thing. Getting there and the war itself is by far the most difficult. As many veterans of my own acquaintance nowadays have told me, it's not always that easy, just going home again. Now, the other theme in the Odyssey, I think perhaps the main theme, is that of hospitality, or what the Greeks called xenia, or the guest-friend relationship, or the guest-host relationship, rather, and the sort of rules that govern the customary behavior between guests and hosts. In ancient Greece, as in most, perhaps all traditional First Nations cultures, there existed a sort of code of conduct, varying somewhat from place to place, but more or less a code of conduct between hosts and guests. It's a necessary relationship for reasons both economic and diplomatic, and really just a matter of sheer survival. So when one had to travel, in ancient times, from place to place, a very dangerous, thing to do sometimes. Now, as alluded to in the citation from the poem I just read, the god Zeus was thought to oversee this relationship, rewarding proper behavior of mutual prosperity and happiness and punishing violations of calamity, as you see some of the other suitors warning Antinous at the end of our recitation. They were sort of afraid. As you see at the end of the poem, they had reason to be. Now, with that in mind, let me take this opportunity to recognize, along with Kirby, that we are in the heart of Treaty 6 territory. And with that, let us turn to a poem from First Nations oral tradition as recorded in John Robert Columbo's collection book, Songs of the Inuit. Now, I know what you're thinking. The Inuit are pretty far from Treaty 6 territory. That's true. And later, if we have future episodes, we will certainly get to Cree and Ojibwe, some Métis poetry as well. But for now, I've picked this one just because I'm quite fond of this poem, and I like the theme of being in one's homeland physically, but being mentally far away, troubled by anxieties. So, at the case, we'll read Dead Man's Song, and that's it, dreamed by one who was alive. So, in fact, this is sort of the persona of the poem, is actually sort of somebody who's passed on from this life. And is sort of, as you would imagine that, if you were sort of dreaming of being, dead and passed on in the afterlife. So, with that, I am filled with joy when the day peacefully dawns up over the heavens. Aye, yeah. I am filled with joy when the sun slowly rises up over the heavens. Aye, yeah. But else I choke with fear at greedy maggot throngs. They eat their way in at the hollow of my collarbone and in my eyes. Aye, yeah. Here I lie, recollecting how stifled with fear I was when they buried me in a snow hut out on the lake. Aye, yeah. A block of snow was pushed too. Incomprehensible it was how my soul should make its way and fly to the game land up there. Aye, yeah. That door block worried me, and ever greater grew my fear when the fresh water ice split in the cold, and the frost crack thunderously grew up over the heavens. Aye, yeah. Glorious was life in winter, but did winter bring me joy? No. Ever was I so anxious for soul skins and skins for cammocks. Would there be enough for us all? Yes, I was ever anxious. Aye, yeah. Glorious was life in summer, but did summer bring me joy? No. Ever was I so anxious for skins and rugs for the platform. Yes, I was ever anxious. Aye, yeah. Glorious was life when standing at one's fishing hole on the ice. But did standing at the fishing hole bring me joy? No. Ever was I so anxious for my tiny little fish hook, if it should not get a bite. Aye, yeah. Glorious was life when dancing in the dance house. But did dancing in the dance house bring me joy? No. Ever was I so anxious that I could not recall the song I was to sing. Yes, I was ever anxious. Aye, yeah. Glorious was life. Now I am filled with joy, for every time at dawn makes white the sky of night, for every time the sun goes up over the heavens. Aye, yeah. There ends the recitation. I apologize if I didn't get the refrain quite correctly, but That was the refrain. Well, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed being with us. Before we go, I would like to mention that while the library is temporarily closed, you can't come here physically at the moment due to the crisis, we do have e-resources for our patrons on our website. Just go to the North Battleford Public Library website and look into e-resources. We have lots of poetry on as ebooks and Hoopla, Library to Go, and we have many. Particularly if you're in school right now, sort of doing school by distance, we have many academic articles and papers on poetry, literature, and many other topics available if you look under Academic One File Select. And then just below it on the e-resources page, you'll find a new resource we now have called Ancient Medieval History, which I found some good stuff on Homer and the Homeric epics there. So you might want to look at that. So if you have the time, and nowadays you might have the time. So anyways, thanks for being with us today. So, and until next time, Kirby and I wish you again in good health, and see you later.